Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Living on Music. I'm Steve Hauk, and over the last 2.5+ years that I've been doing Living on Music, it is always wonderful to come into commonalities with your guests, and there is no exception today with one of the most well-known local DC-based songwriters and performers over the last number of years, and who's had a very interesting career and has come into fruition too later in his career a lot with records and also a brand new one. And there he is. It's Edward O'Connell, who's going to be with me today on Living on Music. He carries what I love the expression, a tunesmith torch that earned him comparisons to people like two of them just saw in Delaware about a month and a half ago, Elvis Costello with opening Nick Lowe. But he's gotten a sense of that. Tom Petty, Warren Zevon, he's really something else, and has garnered various songwriting awards, multiple Wammie nominations, and here in DC. Appears regularly in bands, the Cooperators, the McDuffees, the Montgomery Warlocks. He's been one thing we're going to really talk a lot about, and it's where we met, and that's why you see behind me Wolf Trap's barns, the barns at Wolf Trap, where I had my second BandHouse gigs performance of my life. And I'm a midlife cover band guy, and I've been playing with people like this guy who was at the Elvis Costello. But we're going to talk a lot about the BandHouse gigs and Newmyer Flyer gigs he's done, because there have been some exceptional performances, and you're going to see a good slew of clips from those. But he's got what's referred to as an encyclopedic knowledge of pop music, and what it does. The commonality is not only that we met here at the Barns for the BandHouse gigs, but we were both born in Connecticut. He 5 years before me in Hartford. My mother was born in West Hartford in 1935. I went to the University of Hartford for 2 years. And my mother grew up in West Hartford, and Ed was born in Hartford. Also went to Yale. Both my parents went to Yale. So I love those kind of commonalities, and we'll be talking about some of those familiarities in Connecticut. He played, was a DJ on some wonderful radio stations that I listened to as a kid. WPLR in New Haven. You had Hartford's WHCN, and we've got some stories about his time there. And that was a wonderful ride. And then again, really did up his music over the years too, with a number of bands. As I said, the albums, and the newest one, Feel Some Love, which is just about to come out. And we're really excited. And not only is the album just about to come out, but his daughter is just about to be married this weekend. It'll be a week before when we finally premiere the episode. But big congratulations to Ed and his wonderful daughter and family on that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is really exciting. Great to see him again. But please give a warm Living on Music welcome to Edward O'Connell. Edward O'Connell, welcome to Living on Music, my friend.
Steve, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. And I know your time might be a little bit limited today. You're going to go see Bob Weir this evening.
I know. That is very exciting. And you have a busy week.
I guess for you, the rumors are true. You're changing the name of the show to why is Alexa talking to me? They're changing the name of your show, I hear, to Living on Reds, Vitamin C, and Cocaine.
Yes, I think that's exactly it. And if we don't hear that tonight, I'll be very surprised. I know they're going to be playing some Dead and some Bobby and some with the NSO. So you can't beat that. But very happy to have you here on a week that, I'm going to see. I'm busy this week, sure. But it's very exciting that Rachel, your wonderful daughter, is getting married this weekend. When the show premieres, she will already be married, a husband and
happily
wife.
Married woman. Yes.
Very, very.
I will have given the speech.
Very, very exciting, and congratulations on that as well. But I've known of you for many years. If you look behind me, you see the Barns, and that's where you and I believe, met for the first time. It was I've only done two BandHouse gigs things before, and they've been two of the greatest things in my entire life, being a midlife cover band guy, not a full-time musician like so many of the people that I get to sing next to at those gigs. But this is where we met. I know that you are steaming ahead on a few levels. We're going to talk about past, present, and future. Right now, it's present with where did the last 2.5 years go for Edward O'Connell? How did you, it seems like it actually helped you prepare for your record. And so, a lot of musicians I've had on the show, they were able to go forward in the last 2 years.
It certainly did, Steve. I do want to, just for the sake of the historical record, if you go back and look at our Facebook Messenger trail, you'll see that we became acquainted in 2015.
That's
I
right.
responded to a Facebook post. You were looking for a pianist for a Stones cover band, and I thought I could do incredible.
That's right.
Ian Stewart. But I think you had found somebody. So the message was, "We'll call you."
I wish we're trying to reboot that band, and we need a keyboardist. But hey, you never know.
You know where to find me now.
I sure do.
But back to your question.
Right.
We went into. I did get 3 gigs out of the year 2020. One of them was a Beatles love song right at the beginning of the year, and then in February of 2020, we played our first gig with Jonathan Mudd and the Powers That Be, which was a band that Jonathan put together, and it had a bunch of interesting people in it, including Chuck Sullivan was the drummer, Cal Everett, who I played with, but I'd been on shows with him, but never in a band. Sure. And we had a gentleman named Steve Garrity on guitar. Steve like Cal did, had a really tough commute. So Steve dropped out. We had Parthon and Huxley for a night in the band, and then we had Buddy Griffin, who came in and plays guitar and steel, and I played with Buddy in a bunch of settings. So we rehearsed just a crazy amount of time, learning Jonathan's stuff, and which I really like. And we did a gig at Jam and Java, and then the world changed. I remember going the last concert I saw. I went to see Bruce Hornsby and Y Music on March 7th, I think, at Strathmore. And then, when we were told, do not leave your homes. Usually the problem is there's too much music and too little time. Now there was just a lot of time.
Right.
I really have to give credit to Chuck Sullivan, because Chuck was the guy who was trying to keep the band going during COVID. And part of the way he was doing that was encouraging people to write stuff. Jonathan obviously was the focus of the band and had written stuff, but Chuck is a songwriter. And,
sure is.
More on that later if you'd like to get into that. But
you'll give this a little giggle, because I had Ronnie on the show, and we did a 2.5-hour float down his unbelievable path with thousands of footages, and I wanted Chuck on too, and Chuck's reaction was, "Well, you had Ronnie on. What's the difference?" And I'm like, wait a minute, you're in different bands as you grew up and all that. We laughed, and he did the show. And you're right. It's wonderful to see how he is in the songwriting. And you were working with him, on that record, but you're also preparing demos for what is about to be released.
For my record. And I did it with Chuck. And, Chuck was the guy who sort of was the impetus. It's like, when you have a job, you got to like answer to somebody, and in this case I was sort of answering to Chuck, because I knew it was a great opportunity to go finish these songs that had been kicking around. And the other exciting part of it, and it was actually great, because as much as I enjoyed my cellmate, my wife, during that period of forced isolation, having it was tough to communicate with people, and certainly when you got together face to face, it was it took a while for you to figure out how. First of all, they're masked half the time, and how do I communicate with somebody?
Right.
But really developing a friendship with Chuck during that period was interesting, because we certainly on his songs and a bit on mine, but we really went head to head on a lot of these songs. Right. We had a lot of full and frank airing of views on different parts of the songs, and. But it was really rewarding, actually, to get to know Chuck and see his approach to songwriting, and develop a friendship with Chuck. And of course, Chuck was attached to my project,
right,
like a barnacle. And this is the project.
This is the project, and this is what is wonderful to see, is that you were able to fight the quarantining hell we were all in, and that's why I started living on music, so I could talk to everybody and they could have something to do. We're a little farther out of it, but we're still around and hopefully pushing out. But I am so glad that this record is out. I've loved some of the stuff I've heard. Talk a little bit about the songwriting that's in this. Where did it come from? Was it fairly recent? Was it over years and built to come out? I know you have two other albums prior.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag. My last record was in 2014, so it's been 8 years, and I had some songs written. It's that problem. You do your first album, and then you got to get the second album out, and then you got to get the third album out. But you have to write a lot of songs for that. And this time around, I wrote all the songs except for one on my own. And my other records, my very good friend Peter Gilstrap,
Right.
from The Neighbors, was a co-writer on a lot of songs. But it was a mixture of older things and new things. And working with Chuck, it was also an excuse for me to learn how to do Logic Pro X, which is a home recording software system.
Sure. Yes.
And like Pro Tools, and learning how to use that allowed us to make very detailed demos of my songs, as well as we worked up 13 songs of Chuck's that we did demos for, and that's the project we're working on recording now. But then it came time to put the record out, and as you're probably well aware, doing these records, it's a really kind of massive undertaking. You have to corral people and coordinate schedules, and doing it in a time of COVID had its own challenges. But the first thing I did was to reach out to my collaborator on all my records, Jared Bartlett, whom I met through real fortuity, but who is just like a brother from another mother. Although he's I think he's 25 years younger, but he's a very wise soul, and has been a great collaborator for 12 years to work on. I feel like I can't do a record without him. He's got a really good sense of judgment and of what works, and he's an incredible engineer and mixer as well. So Jared had always wanted to do a record where we had a band that played in the studio. In fact, the reason I got to know Jared is his brother-in-law is Luke Brindley of the Brindley brothers, and of course Jam and Java. Elizabeth Brindley is Jared's wife. And many years ago, when I was first sort of developing the songwriting thing with a view towards putting out records, I started paying attention to the Artist in Residence series at Strathmore, which is run by a wonderful woman named Betty Scott. And Betty put together this program, probably in 2009, 2008. I'm not sure when it started, but it's been going strong. And she brings these artists together from different fields. They collaborate with each other, and it's just a wonderful program. Luke was an artist in residence, and he played some performances of his first self-titled record, Luke Brindley, which is a great record. Very, very warm, organic sound. It sounds sort of like those Van Morrison records from the early 70s. And I just thought, wow, who produced this record? That sounds great. It was Jared. And I went up to him at Strathmore not in the big hall, but in the mansion after one of Luke's shows, and introduced myself, and then just started working together. And anyways, when we embarked on this project, I had called Jared last November to let him know what was up, and that Aslan is on the move, so to speak, and we've got a new thing happening. And then he said, let's do it differently this time. I went back in preparing copious amounts of video, and I'm sorry that you have to sort through it all, but it was a useful exercise to prepare for this show. I saw some video, which I didn't send you because it's just kind of weird to see, from the second album, which is just tracking the bass and drums. And we used to put the first two records together like that, where it was just, we just did rhythm tracks separately, and then we had added things on. This time we had a different approach. Let's have a full band in the studio, and let's do it live. We did overdubs, of course, later, but all the basic tracks are just a band running through them. And when we put the band together, first of all, we had Buddy Spear. Buddy has played guitars on all my records, and he's a lovely guy. He also is the co-owner of the studio that we use, which is 38 North,
38 North.
Right near the
Sure.
State Theater. It's a wonderful place to work.
It sure is.
The folks there, Buddy and his partner in 38 North, Sarah, are just terrific people. And Buddy's just a fantastic musician. I'm really lucky that Jared introduced me to Buddy when we were working on the first record, because at one point we have other players on the record who were really good, but Jared said, I know a guy, and because we were hammering out a lot of songs, and Buddy came in and just was great. And then we had to figure out who was going to play keyboards on this record, because I play keyboards on all the other records I did, and I didn't want to be playing them while I was singing and playing guitar live in front of a band. So we kind of had a wish list, and it's sort of like the kid or the dog who catches the fire engine. We said, let's ask John Carroll. Now, I knew John from a lot of BandHouse shows, and he's always very sweet, but he's a formidable musician. He's really, and
sure is.
You look at the guy's history, and he's had an amazing history, and he's a really he's a sweetheart of a guy. Anyways, he said, yeah, he would do it, and he lives in Massachusetts now, so he had to come down during the winter. We were going to record at the end of January and February this year, which we did, and John came down for that. There were so many things that had to go right. No major snowstorm. We were dealing with COVID because Jared had planned a once in a lifetime trip to go to Belize fly fishing with his brother, and we wanted to make sure he got on that trip. So we were very religious about wearing masks in the studio. We had, except for there's a group shot of us on the record sleeve, which is one of the few times we all took our masks off, which is why we're all sort of smiling and laughing.
Yes.
Yeah. Finally, no mask, if only for a few seconds.
Sure.
Nobody breathed while we take the picture. But it was just such a great, and none of the five people in the band, Chuck on drums, Scott McKnight, who played bass on my first album and I've known forever, was nice enough to come play bass on this record. And we had Buddy, as I mentioned, John Carroll, and me and Jared behind the board. And those guys had never played together before as a band. And we only did a couple of quick rehearsals with Chuck and Scott. But John is such a pro that it just, you always remember where you were, or you frequently remember where you were when you hear music that you really like. And for somebody, when you make a record, what you remember is being in the studio with people.
Sure.
That's where you first heard the music.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
It just brings back really good memories, because everybody just kind of came together. People were making suggestions. We had these demos which were really very detailed as a roadmap, and that helped our process. But
great.
Well, anyway, so I had despite not playing a lot of gigs in 2020 and 2021, it was an extremely productive time, and one that I look back on despite all the insanity that came out of it and that went on during it. It was a very productive time, and I think you're going to start seeing the results of a lot of people who had time. There are a lot of great records coming out. I'll give a shout out to my friends in the Airport 77s. They've got a new record out, which is great. I don't know if you've had those guys on, but
no, I haven't. No,
you should. They're a great band, and they have a great new record out. And there's lots of stuff. Parthenon Huxley's been working on a new record. I've heard a track from that, which is fantastic.
The guests on the show have been coming on and talking about how they've got these albums ready to go, or they've just been released. Gary Smallwood's just got one out. He's got one. Juliet Lloyd. I mean, a number of my most recent guests really are doing it. Cara Davis and Matty D and those guys. Let's take a little bit of a listen. This is from Ed's recent album, Feel Some Love. It is a wonderful song to kick things off about this record's sound. It's called As No One Once Said.
As no one once said, as no one once said,
tears to be shed, as no one once said. I don't hide what I feel, got no little secrets too deep to reveal, never been anything other than real. It's always too late, there's no borrowed time worth the travel, no need to unravel the life that I led, as no one once said. But give me a sign, tell me everything that you feel, when words no one says, hide a love no one can conceal. But give me a sign, tell me everything that you feel, when words no one says, hide a love no one can conceal. I don't care about time, and there'll be no end of tomorrows, far from the scene of the crimes that we've fled. I don't need your love, and I'll never dream about you anymore. I won't hear your whispers inside of my head.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Edward. You could hear it coming from you. I love that is what has come out of the last couple of years in this new record.
I just want to mention on that
Sure.
on that particular song,
Yeah.
Thomas Walsh from a band called Pugwash sings harmony vocals on that
nice.
tune, and he sings on two songs on the album. They're Pugwash and Thomas are based in Ireland.
Wow.
They've toured the U.S. A couple of my BandHouse friends, Desson Thompson and Mike Mills, are big
yeah.
Pugwash fans.
I want to jump into your history a little bit. It's got a lot of familiarity to me, and I didn't know that, to be honest, when we were going to jump into this. And you're born in Hartford 5 years before me being born in Wilton, Connecticut, about 30 miles south, obviously, down in Fairfield County. You lived in Connecticut for a pretty long time, and the musical household is what began you. Is that true? Your parents, your brother, your family?
Yeah, my dad played piano. He was a dentist,
Great.
but when he was in dental school, he was in a jazz band. He played piano.
Right.
He played more sort of society piano, and of course, you're talking about songs from the 20s and the 30s.
Right.
So it wasn't it wasn't modern music that he was playing, but
Sure.
my mother's family was fairly musical. She came from a big family. There were 7 kids in her family.
Wow.
And there were a lot of musicians there. We had a piano in the house. As a kid, I took piano lessons
Right.
with my brother. We took them from a nun who was like in her 80s or something. She it was kind of we did that for a couple of years.
No, she did. She did something right.
Yeah,
So,
and and it was fun. And then, but then I kind of wanted to play. I guess it was, this was probably like 67 or 68. I wanted to play. I was 11 years old. I wanted to play, more modern music. And so then I stopped taking with the nun, but we got this guy named Merrill Doucette, who was like a guy who looked like Bill Evans, jazz pianist, and like acted like Bill Evans. At the time, I didn't appreciate who Bill Evans was, but this guy was like Bill Evans. And he'd smoke. We'd be doing a lesson, and he'd be,
oh, that's funny.
So it was birth of the cool.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
But so I took piano lessons. The other big, I think, the thing that shaped me was just frankly like church music. You'd go to
Yeah.
church, and
Well, you were an altar boy, a
I was
choir,
a parochial
right?
school, yeah, choir. So he did all that, and I think just hearing that music, or you know, uh, had an effect.
Sure.
And then there was that period of time where, after Vatican II, where everyone, a lot of churches wanted to develop the so-called folk mass,
Yes.
which in our case was a bunch of eighth graders
Oh,
playing really crummy acoustic guitars in an insanely cavernous, echoey church. So it just sounded like the beginning of My Sweet Lord, but with the reverb turned up to 11, and
right.
it was a big sonic mess. But that was
Right.
it's one of my
Right.
first groups, was the folk mass, and
Right.
my brother played
Right. And then
was too. So
the early influences were a lot of British rock and roll, the Beatles, Who, the Stones, Traffic, and then some Birds, and there was that kind of
yeah, a lot of
general feel
birds.
of
Yeah,
music
the
at that
bird.
time.
Yeah, yeah. The birds thing was funny because when I first started taking guitar lessons, my parents had a friend who had a daughter. She was like 14, and I was probably 10 or 11. And so, the 14-year-old was, like, to my mind, an incredibly sophisticated older woman.
Right.
And uh, the songs she taught me were "Catch the Wind" by Donovan. But then she taught me this Birds. Had me learn a song from, I think it's on 5D,
Right.
Birds album. And it's a song called "I Come and Stand at Every Door," which is about the atomic bombs being dropped on Japan. So it's like,
Whoa.
I come and stand at every door, but no one hears my silent plea.
Oh my God.
But so that might have been my first introduction to the Birds, and certainly to that album
Right.
5D, which
Right.
I just love that
That
record. And
that's great.
so and
Well,
a lot of these influence came also from just visiting cousins. I had a
oh,
group of
neat.
cousins whose mom was very hip, my aunt Loretta, and she bought Pet Sounds, all the
Oh,
Beatles albums. So almost every Sunday we would go visit my father's mom in Wallingford, Connecticut,
right.
where he grew up.
No, no, yeah.
And we'd go in the back room as kids and with our cousins, and they just put these records on. And we would sit there, listening to these records. So that certainly in terms of Pet Sounds, that was the first place I heard Pet Sounds. So that made
Oh,
a big impression on me.
oh, that's great. You went from there, to Loomis Chaffee in Windsor, which I had many friends who went there back in the day, and it was really where your bands began. You formed the high school bands, and you had some eclecticity to what your music was. I mean, I love the fact that it was Springsteen and the band and Van Morrison and things too, with some Laurel Canyon artists.
Yeah, I got to tell you a story about Bruce, because there've been a couple of Bruce Springsteen encounters, and
Nice.
I sense you're a fan to some degree. Um,
Just a bit like this. Yeah.
yeah, right. Me too. So I fell in with. I had a couple of really good friends. Well, I had a lot of friends in high school, but a couple of particular friends were real music heads. A guy named John Presley, in particular, who went on to be he was in the Whiffin Poofs later. A bunch of us ended up going to the same
Wow.
college. 3 out of the 4 guys in my high school band ended up going to Yale, although we didn't play once we got there. We were doing other things. But John was turned me on to all kinds of bands. He was really into Traffic, The Who, Clapton. He was very knowledgeable.
Wow.
And there's a guy named Ed Alton who played bass, and Ed later, at the time, was taking bass lessons with Stanley Clarke, which
Oof.
because at that period of time when I was in high school was just the dawn of fusion. There was this period, and if you weren't a certain age, you might have missed it. But one of the earliest concerts I went to see was going to see the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I
Yes.
saw them. I saw them a lot. But
Wow.
these guys that I was playing with, Eddie, as we called him at the time, Eddie Alton, and John Presley and Myron Usman, we were also into this fusion jazz. And Eddie in particular was infatuated with Larry Coryell and wanted to bring Larry to his school.
Oh,
He went to a different high school in my hometown, but so they asked me, Eddie and another friend asked if I wanted to go down to New York to see Larry Coryell, because they were going to go talk to his manager. And this was, Eddie was a 16, 17-year-old high school kid. And I didn't go, but when my friends came back, they said, "Man, you should have come down for this thing with Larry Coryell at the Gaslight," because before Larry went on, there was this other guy who came up and played, and he was really funny. His name was Bruce Springsteen,
Oh God.
and it was the audition for John Hammond when
Oh yes.
it was that week in '72. I wrote the date down someplace to
Yeah.
prepare for this, but it was like,
Sure.
I don't know, April of '72 or something. It was whenever John Hammond said, "Let's bring you to the Gaslight and have you sing some songs." So my friends were just raving about this guy, Bruce Springsteen. So that was the first time I had heard of Bruce. But yeah, we and then when Bruce's record came out, which was still when I was in high school, we all really loved the first two albums for
Sure.
obvious reasons. And
Yes.
then just while we're on the Bruce Springsteen tip, let me just finish my
Sure.
stories here. Bruce, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to 1975 when I was in college.
Right. You went to the Bottom Line.
Yeah, I saw the last show of that stand.
Instrumental shows in Bruce's career for sure. Those were, and he talks about it in his bio.
Yeah, and I went to the show with my friend Tony. He's from Baltimore, and we get into the Bottom Line, where I saw a lot of great shows over the years. But we're sitting at a table, we sit at this table, and Tony excitedly looks up at the guy sitting across from us, and he goes, "Hey, you're Nils Lofgren."
Oh,
I'm from Baltimore. I love Grin. Grin is great. And Nils was just, being kind of humble and nodding his head, saying,
right.
saying thank you. And Tony chatted with him a bit more about Grin. And then my friend Tony got distracted with somebody else. He sat down and shifted away from Nils. And I think Nils was still waiting for more, tell me about how much you like Grin. But Tony didn't get back to Nils, and then the show was starting pretty soon thereafter. So the show starts. Bruce is just, I'm just astonished at what I'm seeing, and this is like just no other show I've ever seen. And he's jumping on the piano. It was really just kinetic and incredible. And Nils was clearly getting, just kind of restless, and after about 4 songs, he got up and he left, and he just looked, and he kind of left hurriedly, and I never understood what happened until many years later. I read an interview in Backstreets with Nils, and it turns out the next artist who was going to play at the Bottom Line after Bruce finished his stand was Nils Lofgren, who was promoting, I think it was on the verge of promoting, or was actually promoting, the so-called Fat Man album, his first solo record. And after hearing Tony say how great Nils was, I as soon as I got back to New Haven, I started buying Grin's albums, and became a huge fan of Nils, and then started to go see Nils every chance I could. And then just taking it back to John Hammond one time, one of the nice things about being in, after seeing Bruce at the Bottom Line, I started following him every subsequent show on the East Coast. I tried to go see up and down, and a friend of mine who's also a Springsteen nut said he used to check. This is before the days of the internet. He used to call a CBS Records publicity line where you could find out who was playing where.
Right.
And on that publicity line, they mentioned Bruce Springsteen playing in Wallingford, Connecticut. And it was not otherwise anything that was being publicized. He was playing at the Choate School in Wallingford, which was John Hammond's alma mater.
Wow.
And it was at the request of John Hammond, and it's in a small black box theater, just a couple hundred seats. And so my friend who found out about this calls the Choate School and tries to work a media contact. Yes, I'm from WYBC, and we would like tickets to the 2 tickets to the Bruce show, because we're covering it for media. And he got 2 tickets, and we couldn't believe our luck. We got there that day, and this was when Bruce was performing on the so-called, it was the beginning of the dispute with Mike Appel, and the Chicken Scratch Tour, as they were calling it, started to develop. But this was a different Bruce Springsteen who came on stage that night. He was clean shaven. All the other, the Bruce of the Bottom Line shows was the floppy hat, the scruff, the sort of tramp look. This was like this was like Bob Dylan at 65. He came out in a black suit, vest,
Yep.
clean shave. It was just like, wow, who's this guy? And it was just, an incredible show. We got there like as we did back in those days, we'd get there like 10 hours early,
Right.
thinking, gee, Bruce is in the same city I'm in. I can't believe it.
Right.
And we,
Yep.
so we as soon as the doors opened, it was all general admission. We got right down to the front row. So
fantastic.
After waiting, but it was just, it was a wonderful show. And I've seen Bruce a bazillion times. And,
yes, I have too. And I can't wait for March 27th in DC.
I tried. You are number 2000 in line. That's what they said. But I've seen him a lot, and there's some artists. He's one of those artists that when you think back, you say, "Boy, I'm kind of glad I hitched my fan wagon to his star," because
me too.
He really hasn't disappointed. He's taken different turns, and he's certainly been incredibly successful.
Oh, totally! It's been an amazing ride.
It's just been, and I saw the Broadway show the second night again through sheer luck and a ticket lottery.
Yeah, that's great.
Anyways, so
and he's got that
Bruce Springsteen.
He's got that new record coming out too. The soul covers, which is wild. Breezing into your life.
We're just going to talk about Bruce for the next 2 hours.
I can do that for the next 2 hours. I just did it with a Bruce podcaster about a month ago, and it was like, wow, this is heaven. We're in the 70s, Yale was part of you. My parents both went to Yale, so I know so well that university. Wow. And that became kind of you said the music got put back a little bit in terms of playing as much, and you kind of jump into the music industry world a little bit more with CBS Records, College Rep, which must have been a blast. You had that must have been a neat kind of phase for you at Yale going forward before the radio hit.
Yeah, it was. That grew out of working at WYBC. There was a very active CBS Records college rep program. Good. I think I got paid $25 a week, and I did it as a junior, I guess.
Nice.
I ran the radio station. I'm sorry, as a senior. I ran the radio station during my junior year, and then senior year worked for CBS. Which was really interesting because there were some there were about 25 people in the college rep program around the country, and some of them were incredible superstars. One of them famously was a guy named John Sykes, who I believe he's currently the president of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but he was an MTV executive. He's had a tremendous career in showbiz, but he was a dynamo as a college rep, and he just produced these. He was at Syracuse, where they had a really great the Newhouse School of Communication. Right. So it was just anyways. So at the end of my college repdom period, I still remember the phone call with the folks who ran the program. They said, "Okay, Ed, what would you like to do?" And of course, I gave a speech about how A&R would really be great. If there's anything available, where you work with artists. And they said, "Well, we think we've got something as assistant East Coast tour publicity we could get you on." So I'd be writing press releases for REO Speedwagon. Not that there's anything wrong with REO or anybody.
No, not that.
But it would just have been it would have been writing a bunch of press releases. It really wasn't what I wanted to do. So I stay in radio at that point. But it was a lot of fun to do that. And I also produced concerts that year.
Neat.
Too. I was my friend Tony, there's a guy I went to the Bottom Line with, sort of bequeathed to me his role working with Jim Koplik and Shelley Finkel, cross-country concerts.
Oh my God.
They were
those names were on every ticket. My God,
they were the showbiz experts, and our role was really to work with fire marshals and the school. They have a very valuable. These shows were in Wolsey Hall, where they have incredibly valuable the Newberry organ. So we had a boxy organ up and make sure everything was. And I didn't actually get to, I was walking around just dealing with fire marshals when the shows were happening. So we did put on some great shows my year. Most noteworthy for me, at least, was Little Feat. Played at Wolsey Hall my year. But again, I didn't get to see the band that much because there was just so much to do in terms of the logistics of running the show,
Sure,
making sure that everything
sure.
was working smoothly. But
Well,
that was also part of my experience in New Haven.
well, and so was the part of the experience meeting a lady named Susan
Yeah, my wife. I
of
said
so many years.
Yeah, in whenever it was 1974.
Right.
She sat next to me at the WYBC orientation meeting, the sort of first meeting to try to recruit people for the radio station. I remember distinctly. She does not, for whatever reason, but then, yeah, we got to know each other through the radio station, and the rest is history. And
Sounds like beautiful history. By the
yeah,
way,
yeah, I've been very lucky.
I love that you met at Yale. My parents met at Yale, so I mean that's
Yeah.
so wonderful. To kind of, that whole environment there is pretty incredible. That all seemed to kick you right into what looked as a wonderful run in radio, and I knew that had happened. PLR, listen to that constantly. My dear friend Tim was on I-95, and he went to Emerson College, and that was part of our lives. Was I-95 was a little closer to Wilton, and so, but we had PLR, which HCN in Hartford.
My friend Buzz Knight.
Buzz Knight, yes,
on I-95. Yeah, good.
Buzz was
good man.
That is so great, because that locks us in even more closely because Tim we were in college in Boston, and he would drive down from Boston to Brookfield, right there near Danbury, and he would do a weekend shows Saturday and Sunday, get in the car, drive back to Boston. He'd walk into our apartment and just get into bed and go to sleep for about 7 hours, and then we'd party for the rest of the weekend. But he loved that. He loved radio. That was my initial. I ran the BU, Boston University radio station. I wanted to where Howard Stern began his career, WTBU. And I wanted to do that, but I went into TV, and the rest of me is history for 40 years. But I love the fact that you went right into that from Briarcliff Manor,
I didn't quite go into Briarcliff Manor,
right.
and it's very appropriate that you mentioned Howard, because my first job offer, when I decided I really didn't want to do assistant East Coast tour publicity for CBS Records, but would stay in radio. What I actually did was there was a statute called the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act of 1976, CETA. I wrote a grant for a radio station training program, which funded the program ended up training a bunch of young teenage kids actually how to do radio from New Haven, and so I was proud that got launched. But then I didn't actually teach as part of that. I just wrote the grant for it, but then started working part-time at PLR. But my first radio offer was at WRNW in Briarcliff Manor. I went down there shortly after graduating, trying to figure out what my prospects were. Hardcore unemployed Yale graduate. But I was offered a job there as the morning man for $85 a week. And then Joe Piasek, the program director, aka Joe from Chicago, said, and I'll let you meet the midday guy. His name is Howard Stern. And I went, I would have been the morning guy, which would have been, in hindsight, sort of ridiculous, warming up for the midday Howard Stern.
Right.
And of course, if you're a fan of Howard, you know that he will describe those days as, being not knowing what he was doing,
right,
like the rest of us. But I left. I started doing part-time at PLR, where I just couldn't make $85 a week with an hour and a half commute each way work. But I ended up getting a job offer from WHCN in Hartford, and shortly thereafter, our crosstown rival Triple C WCCC hired a new morning man, Howard Stern. So we had to deal with Howard as a competitor in the marketplace, and I was on against actually Fred Norris was on in the afternoons opposite me. So I think our ratings were sort of in equipoise. So we weren't a threat to each other. We sort of each station had its own group of listeners. That was enough to support it. So we ended up helping to engineer Howard's move to Detroit by we wanted him out of the market because he was a competitor. So we worked with our consultants who were looking for a new morning man in Detroit, and Howard got hired to go to Detroit, which he hated, and then ultimately got here to DC, obviously, and then
he did
to New York. So
you had a really wonderful interview roster too. People like Lowell George and Bob Geldof and Joe Jackson and David Gilmour. I mean, that's a great run at that age too.
They're good and bad stories in that lineup. David Gilmour being one of the more regrettable ones, because I wish I had actually known more about Pink Floyd before going to interview him, because I drove down with the CBS rep in a limo, stretch limo. It's just crazy excess to, we drove down together to New York, and we went to the Plaza Hotel, where we're ushered up into this, penthouse suite that David Gilmour is there, and he's entertaining all of the, Scott Muni's, all of the powerful East Coast DJs were there. And then this, 21-year-old kid who doesn't really know a lot comes in. And it was great when we talked about David's solo album. Then at one point, I asked a question that kind of signaled I didn't really know as much as he probably would have preferred I knew about David Gilmour. And he kind of just shut down the rest of the interview, which was just really, really interesting. He was, in fairness to David, he was probably pretty tired. There were a lot of empty wine bottles scattered around the room. He'd just been talking nonstop. On the other side of the coin, in terms of days I won't forget, is the day Lowell George came by.
Huge.
You can actually read about it in Ben Fong Torres's biography, Willin. If you turn to page 1, my name is there, and he describes, because it was about 10 days before he died that he came by for this interview. One of the first questions
I remember,
Ben asked me, he called me up to do research for the book, and he asked, what kind of shape was Lowell in? Was he, really kind of asking delicately, did he seem to be impaired? And it was absolutely not. He was the loveliest, sweetest guy. He just showed up by himself. He's in Hartford, Connecticut before a gig. What's he, and somebody told him, why don't you just go to the radio station? So he came in, he must have taken a cab from his hotel. He just came by, and he spent a couple hours with me in the studio. And you can find the broadcast is out there, because if you Google, I have to say, I sound like I am inhaling helium because my voice is kind of like this when I'm talking. But I don't know if that's a tape problem, or maybe that's the way I spoke back then. But it was a wonderful afternoon with him. He was just the sweetest guy, and he talked at length about his career.
This is Ed O'Connell. It's about 5 minutes away from 6 o'clock. We've got Lowell George hanging out in the studio before he's going to go on the stage tonight at the Hard Rock Stage West. Lowell George is willing to take your phone calls, too. He's willing. If you want to call up at 522-WHCN, I
will do anything.
Your question.
I will answer any questions. I will tell the truth. I will lie.
One thing I think some people might want to know about, who know about your early career before there was Little Feat, before there was even a toe, there was Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
And you used to play with Frank Zappa. You got your start, or you didn't get your start. You got your start with your parents, but you got your start musically, I guess.
Well, I had played in a couple other groups that remain nameless. One of them had a song about the Charles River and its condition.
The Standells.
I didn't say that.
Oh. The original artist.
I played with Frank Zappa. It was a very interesting occasion to go out on the road and play with Frank Zappa, because he'd make you do all kinds of stuff. One time we played not very far from here. There's a girls' college very close to this place.
Yeah, probably up in Massachusetts.
Probably in Massachusetts. They have that kind of thing going on up there. And someone stood up and said, "Huh, you, Frank Zappa?" Right?
Right.
and some other guy jumped up from across the hall and went, "You can't say, 'What, you, Frank Zappa?' You can't do that." And somebody else jumped up and he says, "You want to bet? He can say, 'What, you,' to anybody he wants to." And then another two guys from across, there were 15,000 people or something. That wasn't quite that big. Maybe I'm exaggerating. How about 1,500? No, there were about 3,000 people in this hall. And pretty soon, the whole place was rocking with people going, "You can't say, 'What, you, that make me, that make me.'" And Frank turned around to me and went, What do we do now?
A few months after that, I saw Jackson Browne, and I went backstage to say hello to him and to give him a copy of the interview because he had spoken about Jackson Browne in it, and it was just kind of a heavy thing to present this to Mr. Browne. As I said, he loved you and he talked about you in this interview, and both of our eyes were like his eyes were welling with tears, and I started to well up too. But I just
Wow.
That was just an incredible day to have that time, and we went to see him in New York at the Bottom Line a couple days after he played Hartford, and obviously the tour did not end well, but it was just it was a wonderful experience.
Well, that's fabulous. You were interviewing some of my at the time that you're interviewing them. They're like my favorite musicians at the time. People like Chris and Tina France from the Talking Heads, Billy Gibbons.
Yeah, they were nice.
You know, you've got
he was the greatest, Billy.
Yeah, I've interviewed him once, and what a guy.
Yeah, we went to see him at he was playing at the ZZ Top was playing Good Friday at
nice,
probably of 78 maybe at the in New Haven, and a lot of 15-year-old kids just falling face down, just on too many beers.
Yep.
But after the show, we went back. We were brought backstage, and the guys in ZZ Top were just hanging in their dressing room, and Billy was I think Billy probably was more interested in talking to Susie, who was with me, than with me. But he was the sweetest guy. He had just gotten back from that period where he was living in France. He had gone to France to get away from the music biz, and was the sort of free man in Paris that Joni Mitchell sings about. Even though that obviously not about Billy Gibbons, but he's just a really great guy. And of course, when are you going to come down to Austin and hang out with us?
Right.
So, but it was a great thing to meet him.
That's wonderful. The first time I saw them, I think I was about 15 in Waterbury, Connecticut, as you know, Waterbury, at the Waterbury Palace. And we drove all the way down there, and we were like, I fell in love with them. It was the Fandango tour. The 80s and 90s.
I saw Bruce at the Palace. Bruce played the Palace.
That's perfect. The 80s and 90s were a lot of things that happened. They were you got into law school, you went to Georgetown University, you went into the law world, and you really began to kick back into playing with bands like the Crime Stoppers, with What Gives, the Neighbors, which we'll talk about a little later too, with one of the songs from your current record that bonds them together. But that seemed to be a really interesting time for your profession and your music before things ended up stopping a little while, so you could raise Daniel and Rachel and have a marriage and a life like that.
Yeah, the Crime Stoppers were friends of my wife.
Nice.
My wife went to law school. She actually was in radio with me. She was actually, in some ways, had the more sort of prestigious. She worked. She did some weekend newscasting stuff at WPIX in New York. She had a couple of fill-ins there, but she was a news woman and also a DJ for part of her career. But we all went to law school at the same time. The precipitating event for me going to law school, by the way, was getting my leg broken after I was emceeing a Ramones concert, which maybe I should talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
I had all four of the Ramones, not the original Ramones, because Marky instead of Tommy was the drummer at that point, Marky Ramone. But Johnny, Dee Dee, Joey, and Marky all came in to our mainstream Hartford, Connecticut radio station, and just started playing. We were playing the Dead Boy. They sort of picked the set, so it got there's a lot of punk that we didn't usually play. That we got, and they were fairly monosyllabic in the studio, so it was kind of hard to get them to talk about stuff. So it was people who heard. I wish I had tape of that interview because it was like sort of like pulling teeth. But that night they did a show at the Stage West in Hartford, West Hartford, Connecticut, and we had a radio station banner behind the stage. It was this thing on felt. It said WHCN, big giant thing, and after the show, I had emceed the show and just said, ladies and gentlemen, the Ramones, whatever. And I was with our station mascot, who was a guy named George. Now, our mascot was the Walrus. This is, I am the Walrus. It's not that many years after that. So it was a guy in a big giant green walrus costume. So George is walking around in the walrus costume, and right as the show's ending, I look and I say, "Hey, the banner is gone from behind the stage," and we see some kids walking out with a banner. We stopped them and politely, we thought, tried to took the banner back, and I'm walking with it a few minutes later after my car, and these guys see me with the banner. Like 5 guys jump on top of me. In that melee scramble, my leg was broken, but I held on to the banner and I got a plaque to prove it.
I saw that. Here it is, right here.
And I also got a somewhere in this house, I have a nice get well card signed by all 4 of those particular Ramones.
Oh, wow.
3 of whom are no longer with us. But
right.
That the next morning in the hospital, I realized, maybe it's time to go take those law boards again, and go back and think about career in the law. So
Sure.
That's what I did, and I worked for a firm that did a lot of media stuff. In fact, that's why I went to the firm, because they did a lot of communication stuff. I had entertained thoughts of being, working at the FCC or doing something with radio, which I actually sort of did. I represent a lot of media clients, and
Right.
then in the second half of my career, colleges and universities also, in addition to media school. So yeah, I had a really wonderful group of clients. My wife went to work for the FCC as a lawyer. That's where she spent most of her career. But a couple of her friends in law school were Crime Stoppers, Lenny Stam and Dave Reinbold.
Oh, great.
Dave was a lovely guy who passed away a year or 2 ago, and I learned a lot of lessons from Dave, which I didn't realize until recently. And one of the lessons I learned from Dave, I learned from Ronnie Newmyer and Chuck, and from Todd Wright, and a lot of folks, and learned from you actually, in terms of what you're doing with this show, is the importance of kind of community and building your own community. So anyways, I started sort of the first sort of real band that I kind of joined here in DC was the Crime Stoppers.
Neat.
Who are still in business and still
great.
And I still play with them once in a blue moon. And again, Dave's passing made me realize Lenny met his wife through the Crime Stoppers. There was just this guy, Dave, who in his day job was actually a guy who lobbied people on the Hill to get funding for energy insecure families in Ohio who didn't have enough money to pay for heating bills during the winter. So that was, and it was a part of, Dave helped thousands of people, which I didn't realize.
That's
he was so
great.
modest. You only realize this when you're at somebody's memorial service. But with Crime Stoppers was a lot of fun. I did that for a couple of years, but I also met my friend Pete Gilstrap in '82.
Great.
He worked in the mailroom at the law firm that I was clerking at.
And that helped you form What Gives, right?
Yeah. Well, and Pete wrote still writes a lot of great songs.
Great.
And we collaborated quite a bit. We would co-write stuff. I had a 4-track recorder.
Nice.
So a lot of the 80s was spent doing that. There were other people on the scene at the time. I'm thinking of Kevin Johnson from the Linemen, Eric Brace, and his brother Alan with B-Time. You had Billy Coulter's. I watched recently Billy's interview, which was incredible in terms of learning. Billy was in that band. Yeah, I remember that name. But I didn't know Billy very well then, and he's obviously a lovely guy.
Oh,
but yeah, so
guy.
I played with the Crime Stoppers. What Gives was sort of an intermediate band with a guy named Dave Thaler, who later became the longtime drummer for Bad Influence, a local blues band. But there was more focus on original music, which I was enjoying more. Crime Stoppers were a cover band. I left the Crime Stoppers it was hard to practice law. My career was getting a bit intense, and I was having the experience of, I told you, it was like that scene in All of Me where Steve Martin, they show him in his office late at night, and he looks at his watch, and he's suddenly running into a club where he jumps onto the bandstand and starts, and just in time to play some sort of Django-esque guitar solo. So I had gigs like that. They were at the Gentry instead of nice supper clubs like Steve Martin's gig. Yeah. But where I would just get there barely enough time to make the gig. So I stopped playing in bands and just did more stuff. Pete and I collaborated on all that stuff. Pete went on to join the Neighbors, who were and are, because they're all still around, and hopefully they occasionally, once in a blue moon, reunite, and everybody's in touch with each other.
Sure.
But the Neighbors were a great DC pop band, really kind of like really combining elements of Squeeze and Rockpile together. So
sweet.
With a lot of great original stuff. So
right.
That was a fertile time for local original music then too, as DC has always been.
Well, I bet. And you were churning along, and then again you decided, hey, I've got a job to do, and you ended up having Daniel in '90, and then Rachel in '93. So the '90s were the beginning of your child years. You went
chauffeuring, the chauffeur years, where you bring
exactly
people around.
Totally. Came to be around, I don't know, was it about 2000? You're 44 years old. You rejoined the Crime Stoppers, and what was the motivation to just get back out? You were missing it.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, you mentioned Daniel, and we're talking about the Ramones. I'm remembering that one of Daniel's favorite songs to sing himself to sleep at night that we taught him, of course, was "I Want to Be Sedated." Oh. So hearing a little kid singing,
oh my God,
hurry, get me on the plane before I go insane.
Right.
The Crime Stoppers had there was an opening. Whoever was playing keyboards at the time, it might have been Dave, had sort of moved back to Ohio, and so I rejoined and stayed for at least on the road for 10 years. And that period kind of culminated in the Crime Stoppers got to play. Were asked. Well, actually, I should say, Crime Stoppers. Eric Nelson, the drummer and sort of longtime Crime Stopper, was friends with Nils Lofgren, of all people.
Yeah.
And once in a blue moon, Nils would come by the BandHouse. And one time in particular, I remember he came by, and I was just like, I can't believe I'm playing with Nils Lofgren.
Yes.
And I remember the time I was playing a little Casio keyboard, and we were doing the Rolling Stones. I used to love her, but it's all over now. And I was so excited to be playing with Nils. I looked down and realized I was playing in the wrong key, but you couldn't hear it anyway. So and I think the excitement came across. But
right.
And Nils, I missed a couple of other times when Nils famously joined and sat in for a couple of numbers at the Psychedelic, which was a great night in Crime Stoppers history.
Right, and they did that grin show with the BandHouse or with Newmyer. I wasn't at Strathmore with Nils and Tom and a bunch of other people, and kind of
that was their first the first BandHouse production was a tribute, the tribute to Nils.
Well, that's what's really incredible, Ed, is that again you joined you were with Crime Stoppers for a while, and then once you hit BandHouse gigs with Ronnie, who I know very well, and Chuck, and all those amazing people that have there is such a core, and you became part of the core of Newmyer Flyer and BandHouse gigs. That had to be, considering who was on that on the regular docket, let alone the people that come in and sing. That must have been. We're going to play a few clips from your experiences there, but tell me a little bit about how good it felt to not only go and play with the Crime Stoppers, but then be asked to play as Edward O'Connell with all these different things, the Woodstock, Paul Simon. You and I met right here at Elvis, British New Wave. We've got an XTC clip, which I just love. How did that feel, joining that group?
Well, yeah, it was very exciting for us. We had never experienced, it's like I was saying to somebody the other day, you never forget your first time you see the Sidleys play.
Yeah, right.
You never and
I sang next to them at the Bowie one at Fillmore. Yeah, and there they were, both Annie and Steve.
Is that your first?
That was my first one ever.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It was.
They're wonderful folks.
Oh, and David Kitten and David, who so well, played in the second song, and I'm like, look around, and there's Chuck, and there's Gant, and I'm just like, Mike Mills on keyboards. I'm just like, this is. And you stayed and became a fixture because of your experience, though, playing with those people.
it's that Woody Allen quote of 90% of life is showing up, just being there. But
yeah, you
yeah,
play.
so we were thrilled to play there, and there was a funny, it was the Woodstock 40th anniversary, and just
Sure.
there's a lot of synchronicity in the air when you and I we're starting to prepare to talk, because of course you're doing an interview with Canned Heat's
Yes.
drummer Fito de la Parra, and I actually went to I urge everybody to check that show out, because I went to read about Fito's book, I guess, that he's got out, and I went to a website called the Psychedelic Times, where there was an interview with Fito, which was great. So I will look forward to that.
Thanks.
We did the Canned Heat medley, and in the one of the rituals that when you do BandHouse, there's like it's like the coach's prayer, before you hit the stage. You get together, and Ronnie, everyone assembles, and then Ronnie, basically tells people have a great show and gives you some tips. But it was a new ritual to me. So, we're getting this word, and we're playing at Strathmore, which is like an incredible place to sort of have your first BandHouse show. It's a big stage.
Huge.
Huge. And the people there were really, really sweet. But we all get together, there's somebody whistles, everybody's, assembled, and it's Woodstock, and I didn't know what was going on, and it got very quiet. John Carroll pipes up. He says, "Ronnie, is this the part where you tell us we're all going to have to play naked?" But
that's great.
That show went off well, and it was just, what it's like. In fact, it's fun to watch folks whose first BandHouse show when they have their first, because it's such a. It really is. I mean, I know you talk about it a lot on the show, and I could, like with Bruce, I could talk about it for 2 hours, because it is almost sort of cult-like.
It is.
But and there's a quote, I'm going to garble it, but the late John Jennings said something like, you don't realize what it is until you're inside it, and then you see how sort of as an organism, and it's just a bigger thing.
Oh, it's incredible
with the Wranglers and just the behind the scenes folks, and and those guys, I had never seen talk about building a community. I hadn't seen these 4 guys who I didn't really know. Ronnie, I knew a little bit through Eric Nelson, and Ronnie had actually come and, sat in on a couple of Crime Stoppers rehearsals from time to time. So I knew Ronnie a little bit, and I'd gone to see BandHouse shows, before playing one. But when you see somebody now, like, well, first of all, those 4 guys, the original 4, and then Greg has sort of become the 5th, the Billy Preston, the 5th member. Those guys are like the Beatles of local concert production. And they all had very complementary skills, and the sum being greater than the parts, or at least some, and certainly that's true for the organization as a whole. So it's fun now, like on the Linda Ronstadt show, which we just did in April. Jim Ferris, very seasoned musician who plays with Jelly Roll Mortals, and played with Charlie Chesterman in Boston, and has got a long music history. He just had not been on a show before. A lot of the other guys in the Jelly Roll Mortals had been on shows, but and of course Jelly Rolls grew out of the Neighbors too. Hearing Jim, just watching Jim sort of really soak up the experience was fun. So I've been very lucky to be part of a lot of these shows. You're always playing with somebody different and meeting new folks, and it's just a really incredible virtuous circle kind of thing, where there's just been so many great relationships that have been forged by people playing in those shows. And Ronnie's and Chuck and Greg and Dude and Danny are always looking for new and younger folks. So when I see a band like the Dusk Whales, those 3 guys are just I love I love those guys, and they're so young, and it's like they grew up, I don't know, listening to the Zombies or
Yes.
something. There are these 60s pop classicists, who are just, uh, didn't grow up during that era, but
No.
somehow just sort of intuitively produce great pop
Yeah,
stuff.
they have it nailed too. I had him on my show with Jim Ebert from Cancer Can Rock. We
Oh,
had
sure,
them
yeah,
on because
yeah, with
Chris had
Yeah.
cancer, and they were
And
very,
now
very
he's
special.
a proud daddy. He and his
I
wife
love that.
just
Well, I don't
had,
know if I
had
knew
their
that.
first
Oh
kid.
my God.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
trying to get, I want to get them on Living on Music in the next few months. What we're going to do now is for everybody out there, we're going to show a medley of some of the moments that Ed O'Connell has put together on during the BandHouse gigs in Newmyer Flyer. They include a wonderful performance I love that the Halloween gig that you guys did in 2014 and that you continue to do with the Crime Stoppers. You did Werewolves of London. You've got some wonderful Beatles songs. That had to be, again, the Beatles are such a powerhouse in this area. The groups with Cal and Gary and Tom Lofgren. You've got all the Beatles tribute bands around here. You got you guys doing it there. That always has to be a wonderful experience doing Beatles music, I would think, especially for somebody your age who fell into them as they grew.
Yeah, and I should, before we jump into that, I'll try to keep this really brief, but I want to give a shout out to Carl Straub because after I played that show with the Crime Stoppers, the Woodstock show, sort of being part of that, it really kind of gave me the confidence to sort of say, look, why don't you just go make that first record? You've got the songs. It's sort of a dream is a wish your heart makes,
Right.
kind of thing.
Sure.
But sort of seeing what these four guys did in terms of organizing these shows really sort of gave me the determination, I think, really to sort of okay, I'm going to do this. And I went about it very deliberately. The first person I contacted was Bill Williams, again from the Jelly Roll Mortals,
Right.
and before that I'd known Bill from his time with Kevin Johnson and Alignment. But chatted with Bill. But I also took a songwriting course or class with there was a discussion group on songwriting that Carl Straub had convened. But most of it was talking about the Beatles. We would get together and sort of deconstruct Beatles songs, which was very. I got a lot of insights from Carl, and Carl was very helpful on my first two records, where I would go basically play the demos of all the songs for Carl and get Carl's input on things to fix or what have you. So Carl was very helpful from being sort of song guru and song doctor, and I learned a lot and still learn a lot from Carl. There's a wonderful blog called Hot Plate.
Sure.
So a lot of I just picked up a lot of songwriting
great
wisdom, I think, from spending time with Carl. He's a much admired songwriter here locally too. So anyways, but it was really that first BandHouse show gave me the push to go do the first record, and I certainly do sprinkle little Beatles things in, or maybe they're not terribly well disguised in some places, but it's always a source of inspiration, certainly for the records, because I was always trying, having grown up in a time where you actually could look forward to a new Beatles album. That was a remarkable thing.
Yes, totally.
At least up until 1969 when it sort of stopped. But then you had the solo years.
Sure.
But one of the great things about Beatles records is, of course, there are just so many different styles. You'd get like the music hall thing, the sort of country western thing, and although I'm not going to tell you my albums are like Revolver or Sgt. Pepper's, but that notion of trying to mix things up is certainly, and to approach things, in this day and age of just cranking out singles, just trying to do collections that work as albums all the way through that have a particular feel to them. That's something that, I looked at the Beatles for inspiration on.
Oh, absolutely. And you can feel it from this. This is a wonderful kind of swath of Edward O'Connell playing with Newmyer Flyer and BandHouse gigs. We've got a couple of different things you're going to see here, some solos, some wonderful moments, the Newmyer Flyer John Lennon birthday tribute. You've got a little bit of the John Lennon tribute itself at the Hamilton. I love this stuff. This is a little bit of, again, Edward O'Connell and Ronnie Newmyer and the gang at the BandHouse gigs, Newmyer Flyer.
In the playroom, painting pictures for the children's holiday. Cry, baby, cry. Make your mother sigh. She's old enough to know better. So cry, baby, cry. The Duchess of Capaldi, always smiling and arriving late for tea. Duke was having problems with a message at the local bird and bee. Cry, baby, cry. Make your mother sigh. She's old enough to know better. So cry, baby, cry. At 12 o'clock a meeting round the table for a seance in the dark. The voices out of nowhere put on specially by the children for a long. Cry, baby.
Stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. Oh, I know I'll never lose affection for
Nobody's broken. Will it bring you down? You may be awoken. I'll be round. I'll be round. Tell me that you heard every sound there is. I'm in your bed and swing, but you can't hear me. You can't hear me. I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand, walking through the streets of Soho in the rain. He was looking for a place called Lee Ho Foods. Gonna get a big dish of beef chow mein. I heard werewolves of London. I heard werewolves of London. Now if you hear howling around your kitchen door, you better not let him in. Little old lady got mutilated late last night. Werewolves of London again. I heard werewolves of London. I heard werewolves of London.
Yeah, that shows really the strength of obviously not only the entire ensemble of those shows. Again, that I've been a part of as a midlife cover band guy, and when he asked me to do Bowie, I was like, you have to be kidding for me to sing on the Fillmore, and it was with people like you, the real mainstays. So I love that. Over the last 10 years, albums came back to you or came to you. You did Our Little Secret, which again began that songwriting that you just talked about, that thing that Carl helped with and get the songwriting going. You had at 54, you had Our Little Secret out in 2010, and then in 2014, It was Vanishing Act. That had to be wonderful to do, to kind of continue and to begin really a songwriting bid.
Yeah, I was really surprised when the first record came out. I didn't really, I didn't know how to promote a record like that, and I didn't consciously start to do stuff with it, and then
Right.
suddenly, it somehow people in the power pop blogosphere somehow found the record, and it started getting written up and
Nice.
reviewed, and then I realized, oh, I should get with the program here and start to. So I started to send it out to places, and I called it my Ted Kaczynski School of Marketing, because I would just, like the Unabomber, I would just send packages to people I didn't know,
Right.
with the record in it, and a letter sort of explaining who I was, and it was kind of random, and sort of like when 12 years later I would actually ask artists to appear on the record. Back then I would just send it out to people I liked. I remember I'm a big fan of David Hidalgo from Los
Right.
Lobos, and I found David's address just through you can find people's home addresses pretty easily on the internet. So I would just send stuff out, and sometimes I'd hear back from people. One of my most gratifying moments was running into Ron Sexsmith when he played at Jam and Java. I went up to Ron to say, "Hey, I'm a big fan," and he looked at me and said, "Yeah, hey, I know you. I got your record."
Oh, nice.
And he called his band guys over, and he was very sweet. He said, "Hey, this is this guy." He sent me his record, and it was really good. So I was very lucky with the first record. It got some attention,
Right.
and then the second record, which I think is equally as strong as the first record, and different, and it's got sort of some different elements on it. We have horns on it. We have Chris Watling, and yeah, that's we were sort of challenged at the last minute for a cover concept, so I came up with with this thing. There's a famous photo of Paul Winchell, the ventriloquist,
Loved him.
that looks like this, and you should just as an aside, Google Paul Winchell's Wikipedia page someday, just to read about what an amazing life that guy had. He's got patents for artificial hearts and things. It's just kind of wild.
Wow.
So the first two records, did well. Like, as I tell people, I'm big in Spain, the land where power pop never died. And I would love to play there someday. So, but anyways, that all led up to this new record, where again, I think this record has just kind of a nice feel all the way through it. I just feel like the combination of the people who played on it, the sort of live feel, and with John Carroll's, sometimes very Garth Hudson feel to the keyboards, sometimes playing like Roy Bittan and Danny Federici on the same track, just with that sort of R&B thing that John brings to any project. It just, this record just felt really, really good. So I'm in the process now of trying to promote this one, and I think there's some things that I've learned from the last go around, but it's and I really appreciate talking to you, Steve, and you making the time to let me toot my horn on this a little bit. But it's just kind of weird to I just feel it's a little. I like playing with a lot of different bands, and maybe now that I've got like 40 songs released across the 3 albums, maybe it's time, maybe next year, to start assembling something to play these out more regularly.
Fun.
But it's I feel good about this record. The other thing that was good is we had a couple of songs that we didn't use for the record, so I've got stuff that I've got to go back to revisit to build for whatever the next project is.
Well, what I loved about that was the culmination of the last 5 years. You've continued to gig in local bands, the Crime Stoppers, the Montgomery Warlocks, which is one of my favorite names. And again, going to see Bobby Weir tonight, and I'll think of you and all the other Sunny Triple I got in touch with, and Larry Joseph and all those guys. And I'm like, she's like, "You're going to what?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I can't even believe it. He's playing the 4 nights or something." But during the last 5 years, you continued to do that. We talked about building up to feel some love, but you also lost your brother, and that had to hit hard. Somebody who it seems you were very close with from growing up together where you grew up, and the music ties. give me a little nutshell about Patrick O'Connell.
Yeah, we were 11 months apart.
Wow.
As Patrick termed it, Irish twins, which
I love
had
that.
known the phrase until Patrick said it. But Patrick,
Yes.
We there are three brothers. We all shared the same room up until we were like in our teens, and we were all a year apart, the three of us. So I feel sorry for my mother, and even sorrier for my younger sister who had to put up with the three Stooges. But Pat, also known as PJ, forged his own path. He was big on RBQ nut.
Yeah,
He
I love
famously had them play. Al Anderson grew up in Windsor, Connecticut.
Yeah.
And, Al is a hero, and it actually became a good friend of Patrick's. But
well, I wanted to say, remember that bar at Yale. What's the name of that bar? That main bar?
Toad's Place.
I saw NRBQ's 10th anniversary show at Toad's Place, and they were all in tuxedos and everything. I'm
Wow.
going to interview Johnny, brother of the other NRBQ,
Right.
Johnny Spampanato and stuff. But anyway, yes, Patrick, I know, worked with NRBQ, the Incredible Casuals. He was a renowned and wonderful performer and writer, right?
Yeah, and he was just more of a guy who he had an incredible record collection, and he was always turning me on to different bands. He went to college in North Carolina. He went to Duke, and then he later went to UNC
right
law school. And he knew Parthenon Huxley down there, and he knew he's friends with people, the DBs, and people in that orbit.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a band down there called the Flying Pigs. And
wow.
In fact, Patrick passed away of natural causes suddenly in 2019. And there were a couple of memorial concerts, and I got to go down, and I did one in North Carolina playing with the Flying Pigs and other friends of Pat down there. And then we did one up at the Beachcomber in Wellfleet, Massachusetts. That was organized by the great Chandler Travis, who was a very good friend of Patrick's, and Johnny was a friend too. Pat, he had a lot of challenges in his life. He was in a very serious car accident when he was a young man. In fact, I was told to come up for his funeral, and so he survived. He survived that. Went on to get married, and to his lovely wife. Kathleen, who I'm going to see this weekend, but their daughter had complications at birth, where we knew she only had a few months to live, and Patrick was sort of, and Kathy almost died giving birth to Elsbeth, their daughter, but there were just really tragic complications. So he lived through all that, and he was very stoic about it all, and so anyways, when he passed, it was a shock, but there's something about it that's very comforting, because every time I hear music, I think of the music that he loved, that we both loved, and I think about all the stuff that he turned me on to. The one regret, I really would have liked to have, when I got to the point where I had time and it wasn't, I sort of retired from law. I had always had this pipe dream of we should do a O'Connell Brothers tour, doing his stuff and my stuff. So we'll have to do that on some other celestial plane someday. But anyways, he's a great brother and very important to my musical development. So Pat, wherever you are, feel some love.
Well, that just seems like a wonderful full circle to come to here because of what you have coming up. It looks so exciting. You've got the new record. That's, again, I'm playing a lot of the songs that you've given me access to. It's called Feel Some Love, everybody, right here from Mr. O'Connell. Also, a numerous Newmyer flyer gigs, the Halloween Howl, Backrack David, which, I grew up in the 60s in Wilton, Connecticut, with my parents playing Bert all the time. I wanted to interview him so bad. I'm still hoping. I know he's about 90 something now, I would think, but that sounds, I love the people that play those, the Little Feat tribute, the Beatles love songs coming up. You've got the Fountains of Wayne at right here,
Yeah.
which is in April of 23. That's great. I'm hoping maybe Ronnie will pull me back in for one gig again, because I swear once you do it, especially like me, because I'm not a lifelong musician like a lot of you guys who are the core, but boy, when you go in and you're able to excel in that kind of experience, it's an incredible thing. You also got keep working on Chuck Sullivan's record. Look, Edward O'Connell, this has been an amazing ride, and I just can't wait to keep hearing how you're doing with all these things. Thank you so much for being on Living on Music.
Steve, thank you. Again, what you're doing is a really wonderful thing. I've learned so much about these people that I play with. Just learning about their backgrounds. It's kind of a crash course in local music history. And the good news is that you're never going to run out of people to interview, because there's so many fantastic folks in this community, and instrumentally, there's some giants who walk among us.
Right.
And it's just, I have friends who come here from, my friend Pete Gilstrap was here last week, and we were out and about just catching local bands playing, and he just said that that scene doesn't happen in LA. There's certainly musicians in LA, but not out playing in the clubs or in the neighborhoods or doing all the things that folks do here. And I'm just, it's my dumb luck, to coin a phrase, to be part of this community and to get to play with the people I do. So thank you again for everything you do. Thanks for listening to me yak for a while here.
You were fitting in perfectly with the Living on Music environment, Edward. I can't tell you, when people have these beautiful stories and the Springsteen stuff, I was sitting here going, yeah, well, let's push your career over here. We'll just talk about Springsteen for the next 2 hours. But I love talking to you about all that. And I love the fact that you're continuing to surge forward, especially with guys, the whole crew and the community that plays with Ronnie and Chuck and Danny and Dave and Doug and all the whole group. It's great. Let's keep in close touch as we go forward. And
I'll put in a word for you on the Fountains of Wayne show.
I know. I'm like, oh, you never know. You know what I did ask him? I did ask him the other day, and I not the other day, about 8 months ago, I said, hey, Ronnie, you gonna do a Springsteen show? And he's like, we've talked about that for years. It's something I think in the pandemic was slowing everything down anyway. And he said, when we come out of it down the line, and I'm like, I'd love to be somewhere there, because I sing a lot of Bruce, and also just to be near that kind of tribute too as well would be fun. But have a blast with the tributes in the next few weeks. Good luck with the record. Good luck with you and Chuck's record, and keep living on music with us too, man. I thank you so much again. Keep in close touch.
And Steve, the keyboard offer still stands if you need a piano player.
We'd be in heaven with you playing keyboards in the respectable band. That's what we call it. Just trying to get my bands back. But keep in close touch. Thanks a lot, Edward. Take care.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure, man. Wow. What a great ride with that Ed O'Connell. Thanks, Ed, so much for being a part of Living on Music. It was just a great ride. I've wanted to have you on for a long time. We've talked about it before, and how great was that? I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everybody enjoyed Ed O'Connell. Don't forget, right here it is, Edward O'Connell's Feel Some Love. And you can go to his, obviously go to his website, and that is edwardoconnell.com, and you can find out where that album is and his other records. And boy, what a wonderful guy. Thanks again, Ed. Please keep in close touch. Real quick, everybody who's been listening to this, watching or listening to this episode, please become a part of the Living on Music Nation. That would be wonderful. It's very, very easy, and you don't get over pinged or over bothered. You just get wonderful moments in music across the board, and you can look at them when you want, and you can not look at them. You can do whatever you wish, but I'd love to have people where we're growing our Living on Music Nation. First, the Living on Music Facebook page, close to 1,000 members. Really, really excited for that. You just go to facebook.com groups and Living on Music, or just to search Living on Music with Steve Houck, H-O-U-K, like Ralph Houck, the Yankees manager of past years. Also, YouTube. We are Living on Music with Steve Houck on YouTube, and you just look that up as well. Same search, boom, there we are. Subscribe. Really love to grow that over the next few months or a year. We've been rising pretty wonderfully, and now I really would love to surge forward. So become a YouTube subscriber with Living on Music. And also the podcast group. You don't have to join that. You're probably already part of a podcast. It could be Spotify, could be Google, could be iHeart, could be Apple, but I'm on all of them. So all you have to do is search again, Living on Music with Steve Houck on one of those podcasts. And then you've got probably the last 20 episodes, I think now that I've had on there. And there's some really wonderful ones. And also, you're going to be able to go on to any one of those apps to listen to the podcast, or on Spreaker, which is the base. I love that, Spreaker. And so that is how you can really join Living on Music. We're going to have some fun little gifts coming up as we get closer to Christmas on Living on Music. I've got some amazing mason jars. In fact, here's one right here. And I've sent it out to a few people. Some have been our 500, 600, 700th members, a few artists. But I'd love to send it out to some of my Living on Music Nation. Maybe we'll do some contesting as we get closer, or things like that. But again, love having all of you as part of Living on Music. And, what I'd like to say is stay safe, stay happy, and keep always living on music.